All right. Well, Jake, thank you so much for joining us today. Excited to dive in, hear more about you, your role at Dimensional, and specifically trends around what Dimensional is seeing for firms across the board. So, before we dive into all of that, can you just share a little bit about yourself? How did you get into this role, and what are you specifically doing with Dimensional today?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to the conversation. And yeah, so head of client communications, what does that mean? Well, a couple different things fall underneath the role. It's really everything around our conferences, our webcasts we put on, our industry events, our study groups, our communities that we do. I think about it kind of as the scaled interactions that we have with all of our clients. And I got into the role, I was on the sales team for a number of years. And you go back to 14, 15, 16, sort of that time period, we started to say, hey, we're doing a lot of this stuff for clients, but we maybe need to expand what we're doing, get a little bit more systematic about it. So moved into that. And man, I got a great team that works with me in those four areas. And I think it's really good because everything we design is in direct feedback from what we hear from the advisors working with Dimensional. Hey, if we think about our conferences, this is what we're looking for. Love the fact that you guys are having an increasing presence at industry events that we're at. And then certainly, the virtual stuff, especially during COVID, was an absolute home run for us, and we're continuing to push on that.
Super interesting. I love that you guys have, really listen to what clients need and then being able to act on that. So I also know that you run a number of surveys, right? And you're following the trends and the data with what goes along there. What are you seeing from firms? What's some of the data telling us?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think a lot of people that are probably listening and understand that there's been just a massive amount of M&A that's taken place in the industry. So I think that really is the biggest trend, and that brings up a lot of, I think, opportunities, but also challenges with firms. I think the big question that I have is that are we at an inflection point? I think M&A will still continue, but will it continue at the rate that we've seen over the last 5+ years? And I think there's a lot of reasons to say maybe it may not. I mean, you think about sort of there's a lot of firms that already have been rolled up, which means you're working with a smaller opportunity set. You've got a situation now where you've got higher interest rates, which obviously plays into any type of deal activity. And I think also people are realizing that, hey, listen, we experienced a lot of growth, but we experienced a lot of inorganic growth by rolling up these firms. As we now think about what do we do at this point and how do we achieve a great client experience and achieve organic growth, I think there's a lot of firms that are saying, there's maybe a few more challenges around this as we switch from inorganic to organic. So those are the interesting trends that I think we've seen and the ones to, in my opinion, to kind of watch as we go forward.
Yeah, interesting. We see that as well. So, a number of firms where they've gone through massive M&A and then they get to a place where there's operations to be able to unpack, and then how do you continue that growth at that growth clip? So, anything else that you guys are seeing on the trends piece for firms?
We're starting to see one emerge that I think is a really good sign. For years there was a concern about a shortage of talent and shortage of young talent that's coming into the industry. And while I think that there's still a massive need that's out there, because you do have a lot of people that have been in the industry for a while that are looking to rotate out and retire at some point, we've seen an uptick in younger people coming into the industry. You look at a lot of the financial planning programs that have been developed or are developing at universities, great sign. We actually saw a tremendous amount of hiring with the firms working with Dimensional through the pandemic. So coming out of it, that was awesome to see. So I think there's still a long way to go, and we definitely need more good people to keep coming into the industry. But that to me is really exciting. And as anybody that I talk to that's coming in, I say, listen, you have the huge opportunity in front of you. There's a huge need for you in the industry. You get to do right by people and take care of people because this is incredibly, incredibly important to your clients and your prospects' futures. And quite frankly, you can make a great living for yourself. And as you progress through the industry, you can achieve a really nice work-life balance. So the financial advice space to me is so attractive for people in their 20s because there's just ample opportunity to have a great, meaningful career.
I appreciate what you're saying. You're right. There's been a lot of investment from internally within firms as well as outside organizations to really bring in new talent, but then also to be able to recruit, retain that talent as well. So, what
Yeah,
seeing these?
one
Yeah.
other thing. Sorry, I was just going to say one other thing quickly too on that. And this is probably an ongoing trend, but just the explosion of different investment choices and different investment options. I think firms are really having to kind of weed through on what makes sense. Do we want to try something new? Are there asset classes we need to explore? I think there's a lot of chatter about stuff in private markets, private equity, and private credit. So to me, that's nothing new. There's always sort of the exciting new products that are coming about, but that's an ongoing trend that I think every firm has to kind of wade through of where do we want to go from an investment standpoint.
Yep, that's no, very fair. Do right by their clients as well. So
Yeah,
with
for sure.
with all these trends and things going on, what is Dimensional doing to be able to support advisors, guide them, through these conversations and make sure that they're really equipped with the resources to be able to help navigate kind of what's ahead? So,
Yeah, I mean, if we go back to the first trend on M&A, I think that's something that we've had a really good pulse on ever since the trend kind of started, and we've always tried to make sure that firms have eyes wide open as they go into it, right? It's not just about necessarily getting the deal done, but it's understanding what that's going to mean to the point that you brought it from an operations standpoint, what that's going to mean from an investment philosophy standpoint, what that's going to mean from a cultural standpoint. So really, I say having conversations and helping uh, educate firms on what it means to go into this M&A space. We've got events that we put on, something like our Deals and Succession Conference, where we'll actually bring in not only our own knowledge, but also outside expertise to say, hey, as you go forward with this, these are the things you need to be aware of. These are the resources that you can ultimately lean on. And so I think that that's great because, again, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that it comes down to what's the investor experience. Certainly, we want the firms to get matched up with the right ones. We want culture maintained. But the biggest thing for us is that these firms that have built great businesses, how do you ensure that whatever transition you go through, your clients are well taken care of? So that's exciting on the M&A front. On the younger, I'll say, advisors coming into the space, one of the things that we've always prided ourselves on is taking a very educational approach to investment management, to educating around what's going on in the industry, what it means to create that great financial experience. So, you look this year, we'll put on probably 70 or so conferences here in the US of different types. Those can be from introductory conference around investments to communication workshops to practice management symposiums to business development workshops. So that education is ongoing from Dimensional. One of the things that I think we've done nicely to help support the advisors in recent years is really get more customized firm training. So we put on dimensional events, but we get asked all the time to say, hey, can you come in and can you work with my team around sales training? Can you work around communication training? Can you come in and can you do future firm exercises so that we as an organization can think about what do we want to look like 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now? And what do we have to put in place to be successful to do that? So I think that sort of ongoing education, ongoing training is something that we're continuing to ramp up. And I mentioned, the virtual aspect coming out of COVID. That's a huge part of it. I mean, we do a lot of in-person stuff. I'm on the road a lot, but we do a lot of virtual stuff as well. So that's an area where I think we're continuing to invest. A lot of the studies that you mentioned there, whether it's our benchmarking study, investor study, arming firms with data to empower them to make really good decisions. And then I think on the resources side and on primarily the client ready resources. If you went back about 15 years ago, most of our stuff was much more in the weeds, research, deep dive. We've realized that, hey, that's important and that's in our DNA, but we've really got to help on the investor education and on the communication front, and not just with the training, but actually develop resources that advisors can use in those conversations.
Oh, super interesting. Appreciate that you guys are having those real conversations and be able to pull them out for, leadership. I've heard, talking with others and what have you, I often see that folks sometimes want to go down, for example, an M&A route, and they have an opportunity to really unpack that and hear what does that look like and go, that's not the right route for me. And so they can really make those shifts before they get too far ahead. So going back
Yeah,
to
I would agree with
yeah,
you on that. Yeah, go ahead.
going back to the data conversation, and now that you're arming firms with these different tools, are you seeing any kind of like sort of the creme de la creme? What are the top firms doing that you see as kind of maybe a successful trend as they look ahead? Is there like I've heard a lot of COI referrals are going away, right? How do we diversify lead sources, or is it M&A, or is it a sort of a different bend on that? What are the successful kind of, I'll call successful as growth firms doing?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that we get all the time. I do think that you still see a huge amount of the growth coming from referrals, and a lot of this coming directly from client referrals. Certainly, I think that CIO referrals maybe dropping off just a little bit. But if you have strong ones and you can nurture those can still be incredibly effective for you. Certainly, if we look at anything in the digital space, anything through social, you're starting to see some firms have more and more success there. And you would expect that because that's where people are starting to hang out. That's where people are starting to get their information from. So if you do that well, you'd expect to see some success as well. But again, a big part of it is just coming from the existing client base and from referrals. And the firms that we see be successful are ones that put a referral plan in place and actually do something about it. And I know that sounds so basic, but I can't tell you how many conversations I've had over the years where you have a great discussion with them, you tee someone up with good referral resources, a good referral program. Maybe it's somebody like Dan Allison. They love it. They're fired up about it. And then you come back 6 months later and 12 months later and you say, hey, what did you do about it? They're like, oh, we didn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of it's just sort of that basic blocking and tackling of you just got to do it. So the firms that are having success, yes, they're doing all of these things, but they hold themselves accountable to actually go and execute on the stuff.
Yep.
Because again, it doesn't have to be complicated. If you're delivering that level of service, if you're truly delivering value to the client, you should be able to get referrals out of that experience. I mean, that's what you're doing. You're creating a referable experience. You just got to have a systematic way so that you make sure across the firm, you're asking for the referrals, you're following up on it, and you're doing it in all of those meetings.
Let's do those different touch points. Be able to create those referable moments as well. So
For sure. For sure.
when we look at the next few years, are there any challenges that you see ahead, right? I mean, we've got an upcoming election, potential looming recession. There's all these things that are going on, not to mention all the data sets that you all have that I would assure or would assume would impact sort of that look ahead. What are you seeing? Anything
Yeah, I mean,
we
look,
should brace
on
for?
the investment side and sort of the
Yeah,
events that take place, I mean, there's always, as I like to say, there's always kind of the crisis of the day that's looming.
right,
And it doesn't mean that it's not important, right? The US elections are incredibly important for us here as citizens of the US. You know, you've got a lot of global tensions, wars that are going on. These are not good things. Do we need to be thinking about recessions and all of these things? Certainly, but there's always kind of that looming next event. So on the investment side, there's nothing necessarily that says like, oh, we need to change up, you know, what we're doing or anything there. I mean, if you know Dimensional, we're pretty
right,
consistent on it. Now, the
right,
one thing I will say is that we've definitely moved away from sort of this idea of, oh, it's in market prices, don't worry about it, don't pay attention to it. I don't think that's a satisfying response for investors. You got to be able to make some intelligent comments about it. You got to be able to sort of converse and let people share what's
Mhm.
stressing them out. But then you want to kind of move them down a path of, but we've looked into it. Here's what our approach is. You know, if you think about kind of the trends that are going on and potential challenges you see ahead, I don't know if they're challenges, but here's a couple things that I think about. Let's talk a little bit about fees within the industry. And
Mhm.
a couple of things that you've seen is, you know, you've seen custodial fees, I think, you know, pressed down quite a bit, especially as firms have gotten larger in scale. The ability to access the markets, the cost of that has come down. You look at asset management fees, and certainly here at Dimensional, we've lowered our fees dramatically, and I think that that's okay. You got to respond to industry trends, and we know that there's been a move towards indexing, although you're starting to see that kind of shift back here. I do wonder about the advisor fee.
Mhm.
Now, that said, it's for the last 15 or 20 years, people have been making the same argument of there'll be fee compression, there'll be fee
Right,
compression. And for the most part, you haven't really seen it. I mean, yeah, they come down a little bit, sure. But people have needed to continue to expand the services they deliver and the value to
right.
maintain those fees. So that's another thing that, you know, people need to have on their radars, and I think they probably do. One of the things that I wonder about is we just talked about M&A. We talked about all this consolidation that went on.
Right.
And if you go back to when we started the advisor business at Dimension about 35 years ago, you had a very concentrated industry, right? You had a couple of really big players. They sort of dominated the market. And then there was this idea of this independent fee only advisor that was starting
Mhm.
to emerge. And so
Yep.
you really had fragmentation, good fragmentation within the
Right.
industry for several decades. Now we're back and we're seeing consolidation again. And I think industries go through this natural sort of fragmentation and consolidation. So it's nothing special to financial advice. It happens in a lot of different industries, but that does bring up questions of what is that going to mean in terms of the professionals that you have inside of the organization? We talked about, hey, if you're going to roll up a bunch of firms, if you're going to make yourself bigger, how do you maintain culture? How do you make sure it's still a place that people want to work? What's the impact of private equity? What's the expectation for growth rates? How am I going to get organic growth out of it? And so I do think a trend that you want to watch, and a challenge, I think, for some larger firms is how do you ensure that whatever firms you brought in, you maintain culture? And how do you ensure that that 32, 33, 35-year-old advisor who was with a $300 or $400 million firm
Yep.
and was really happy, and now they're in a large organization, is still happy within a larger organization? And we're starting to see some break away from those big firms.
Yep.
And I don't want to say that bigger doesn't mean that you can't deliver a great client experience. I just think you have to have it on the forefront. And there will be some advisors that say, I want to work for that smaller or medium-sized firm. I want to start my own thing. I don't want to be a part of a large organization. So I think it's an exciting trend to watch, and one that we're definitely seeing a little bit more of kind of quarter to quarter as we're out there having conversations.
Yep, I see that as well. And just because you're a big organization doesn't mean that you can't have a great culture too, right?
Completely.
Um, yeah, lots of pieces to untangle. All right, so I want to just shift a little bit. I want to talk about Dimensional 360. So, do you
Yeah.
mind sharing for folks that are not familiar with Dimensional 360, what is it, and how can we learn more about this platform?
Yeah, so Dimensional 360 really brings together, I think, everything that we've built out over the last 3+ decades on the service and the resources and the support for financial professionals. I think about Dimensional 360 as everything beyond the investment solutions, the investment products that we bring to client relationships. So, three big buckets in that area: investments, communication, and strategy. When we say investments, it's not just the investment solutions or the products, right? It's the research, it's the thought leadership, it's the analytics, it's some of the investment tools that we've built, something like our expanded SMA offering, and the technology interface and the reporting that goes beyond that. It's the UMA offering that we rolled out with. So you've got all these things on investments that can help people inside of their business. Once you get the investment piece of it dialed, you got to figure out how you're going to go talk about it. And that can be talking about your investment approach,
Yep.
or it's answering a lot of the common client questions that are going to come in around recessions, geopolitical events,
Yep.
inflation, elections, all of those
News of the
things.
day. Yes.
It's
Hmm.
news. It's quite frankly, it's a lot of the conversations that advisors are actually having. I mean, let's be realistic. There aren't that many clients who walk in and tell me more. They're like, tell me more about the size premium, or tell me more about the value premium, right? It's important, but those aren't the questions that people are getting. So that's that communication bucket. And if you got your investments dialed, you know how to talk about it, you're probably going to have some business success. And that's where the strategy piece comes into it. So all of the things that we do around our benchmarking study, helping firms say, hey, I'm a $500 million firm. I want to grow. Tell me what $1 billion firm
Yep.
looks like. It's the investor study that we run to say, hey, we've got, over 80, 90,000 data points, survey responses from investors all over the world saying this is what's important about a relationship with a financial advisor. Powerful data that we can use. It's some of the M&A stuff that we talked about. It's the future firm stuff. It's the visioning exercises. So you put all of this together, the investments, the communication, and strategy, and it's really all designed to just support that financial professional in what they're trying to deliver for their clients.
Oh, and where can folks learn more about that? Do you have to be in a dimensional firm to be able to get access to that, or?
Yeah, if you want to read a little bit more about it, you can go onto our public site, dfaus.com, and you can take a look at some of the information that's on there. But certainly we have a password protected site. And I think a lot of the deeper stuff that we start to do with firms are definitely ones that are working with us a little bit more comprehensively. I mean, again, look, we're a for-profit business like anybody else, and we want to work with firms where it makes business sense there. But it doesn't really matter what sort of type of firm you are or what channel you maybe operate in. Dimensional 360 is designed so that any firm that's looking to deliver a great client experience, and quite frankly, I think leverage 35 years of experience from a global asset manager like Dimensional, they can lean into it. And as I always say, I promise you're going to find stuff in there that's going to help you in your business.
Yep, absolutely. Jake, anything that you want to touch on that we have not covered today?
No, I'm really excited about where the industry is going. I mean, I think there's all of these challenges that are out there, and you read a lot of, I don't want to say a lot, but sometimes I feel like it can be a little bit negative, and people pick on what's going wrong in the industry.
Right,
But
right.
you look at the cost of good financial advice, and quite frankly, good investment management, and it's come down, and that's a great thing. You look, I think, at the how much more educated investors are about what's available to them and what's important that's out there. You look at about the experience that really go from the wirehouses to the independent broker dealers to the RIAs to the banks. I mean, all of them are looking to deliver a great client experience, and I think that they really are. So I'm incredibly optimistic about where this industry's at, where it's going, what the potential is. And again, as long as we keep our focus on the investor, I mean, as long as all of us keep our focus on that and know that's why we're waking up every day and doing what we're doing,
Right.
man, I get really fired up about this stuff.
Right. You take good care of people and do good work. So, uh,
Exactly.
excellent. Well, Jake, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing more about what's happening, what you all are seeing at Dimensional, not only with the different studies you have going on, the trends, what you're doing about it. We touched on Dimensional 360 quite a bit. Really appreciate your time today. And for folks, we will include links as well, and a transcript below for more details. So thank you again.
Great. Thank you.